So our grand finale storyteller for our afternoon is Kim Keith. Kim, you are also a Tacoma native. You've worked in the arts and culture sector since 1992, which does not date you in the slightest. And you hold a Master's of Nonprofit Leadership from Seattle University, a BA from the Evergreen State College with a focus on art history and studio art. You've worked in museums, developing and delivering educational programs, most specifically for at-risk youth and diverse audiences. You've been at the Children's Museum of Seattle and the Museum of Glass in Tacoma, and you earned your PhD in sociology at Goldsmiths, University of London. In London, you were a trustee on the board of Black Cultural Archives in the Brixton area of South London, and here in Tacoma, you serve on the advisory committee at Oasis Youth Center in Tacoma. With all of this, what does it mean for you to have had a career where you've been able to support creative expression through art for youth?
Oh, thanks for having me here today, Megan. Yeah, I grew up on the hilltop, and I went to Bryant Jason Leon Stadium, and so that means that my office is in my middle school that I went to, and Hilltop Artists is something that's really important to me. We are a youth development program that uses art as a means of engagement for working with young people. And so we work with the whole student, and we work with their social and emotional learning and well-being in mind. And we do that through having teachers that are trained in YPQI, so Youth Program Quality Initiatives and Social and Emotional Learning. And our mission is to use glass art to connect young people to better futures. And we do that by teaching them how to use 2100 degree glass. We work with kids that are 12 to 20 years old. And it's really important that we do this work because students face a lot of challenges in our community, and they need extra support. And that's true today. It was true in 1994 when we started the program. And it was true in the 70s and 80s when I grew up in the Hilltop. My job is really perfect for me because I am a hilltop artist. I share a lot of similarities in background and experience with my students. And I had art and artists and mentors that helped me to get to where I am today. But it actually took me going around the world a couple of times to actually get to where I am today in my position at Hilltop. As an executive director, I go to lots of events and galas and stuff in the community. And about a year ago, I went to an event and I saw Mayor Woodard's across the room. And I'm like, oh, I want to go say hi to her. And so I walked across and she's talking to somebody. And there's a gal standing next to her. And, you know, I'm waiting. And then we make eye contact. And she's like, are you? And I was like, yeah, I am. And then she laughed, and she put her arm next to mine, and she said, huh, there's only 2 shades difference. And so, as I said in the beginning, I'm from the Hilltop, and when I was in first grade, I had a purple Schwinn sparkly banana seat bike. And I used to ride that bike around the neighborhood, and I love my bike. But I would go down Ferry Street, and these girls would come out of this house, and they would start chasing me on foot, and they'd be going, "Yellow banana girl! Yellow banana girl!" And they would just chase me all over, and they would call me that because I was light-skinned and I was mixed race. And these two, they were my bullies. And those taunts, they really shaped part of my identity. Because these girls, they called out my difference, and they caused me to think about who I was and what I was. And they made me wonder if I had to choose. Do I have to choose to be black or white? Do I have to choose between my mom or my dad? But, I mean, even when I was young, I knew that if you put vanilla and chocolate ice cream in a bowl and you mix it together, it was mixed. And you couldn't take it apart. And that was me. I was mixed. And so that girl that called me Yellow Banana Girl was the woman that was at the gala. And she is a great person. We are both wonderful adults now. And her mom still lives around the corner from my mom. And Tacoma is a big little town. And so this kind of is an example of, you know, part of my process and why I had to leave to come back here and to really understand part of my identity. I was an only child, and I was raised by a single mother who is here in the audience today. My mom was the only white lady in the neighborhood when I was growing up, and she was very conscious that she was raising a black daughter. And so she made sure that I participated in programs at the Urban League. I had a membership at the NAACP. She made sure I had a relationship with my grandparents, my dad's parents, even though I had a really contentious relationship with my father. Later, when I was 17 years old, I picked a new father. And I went to his office and I asked Rogers Wilson, who's a lawyer in Tacoma. I was like, will you be my dad? And he's like, well, yeah. And so I was very lucky that he said yes. And he is still very much my father to this day. Because I knew that I was going to need some guidance and I was going to need fatherly advice in my life. And so that is a very meaningful mentorship relationship that I have. And that's a whole other story. And so I'm going to get back from my digression. But my mom, she was doing her best to help me develop a strong sense of self and identity. And she would help talk me through all those feelings when I was called Oreo or coconut or yellow banana girl or whatever it was. And she also encouraged me to express myself through art. And so painting, drawing, pastels. And she would take me to the Tacoma Art Museum. And that museum became my museum because when I was 8 years old, I drew a picture called Universe. And I submitted it, well, my third grade teacher submitted it to an art contest, and it was shown in the Children's Gallery at the Tacoma Art Museum. So that became my museum, and my love of museums started there. Later in life, I would work in museums for 25 years. But that was really important when I was young. And so I had this access to making art and to seeing art. And I was building a framework for my ethnic and cultural identity through history and different things that my mom exposed me to in the community. But I didn't have any examples or role models about how to be mixed. And I didn't even know what I was looking for until I found it. When I was 14 years old, I discovered this show on Nickelodeon station called Pop Clips. Now, this was in 1980-81, and Pop Clips was the precursor to MTV. I'd always loved music since I was a little kid. I got my first Play School record player when I was 6 years old, and the first things I got were those Disney albums where the cover is a story. And so you read the story along with the music. And so that was like amazing. And then I started to get 45s. And this was 1973. So my 45s were like Tony Orlando and Dawn, tie a yellow ribbon round the old oak tree. Or Superstition by Stevie Wonder. Diamond Girl by Seals and Crofts. Steely Dan, Reeling in the Years. And so, I mean, this is a soundtrack to my life. And 1973 was just a fantastic year for music. And so I feel really blessed in that way. And that's when my love of music began in earnest. And then in 1975, when I was 8 years old, I saw the video for Bohemian Rhapsody on American Bandstand. And when I saw that video, I fell in love. I mean, the music was so theatrical and the images were really haunting, and I felt it so strongly in my heart. And Freddie Mercury became my first boyfriend. And I realize how ironic that is today. But that was the truth. And Freddie Mercury and Queen taught me about rock music. And in my house, we had R&B and soul, and so we didn't have rock music. And so that was like a really novel thing. I started playing the violin when I was 8. I joined the school orchestra. I was in the Tacoma Youth Symphony, and I certainly wasn't a pop star. But I met a lot of really great friends that I have to this day because of that love of music. But like I said earlier, pop music and videos. The videos, they were my jam as a teenager, and so that brings me back to Pop Clips. So Pop Clips was this half-hour program that had a really limited amount of material that it showed, and it was like these obscure American acts and then a lot of British music. One day, I saw the video for Gangsters by the Specials, and my life changed forever. Now, Gangsters is a ska record, and ska music is a blend of jazz and calypso that was developed in Jamaica in the 50s. And ska was the precursor to reggae. And so there was a ska revival in the late 70s, early 80s, and the Specials were the lead band in this ska revival. And they were made up of working class white English guys and black Afro-Caribbean guys. And they came together to make this incredible music that had a fantastic beat, and they had like this retro cool look where they all wore trilby hats and skinny ties and winkle picker shoes like the ones I have on today that were super pointy. And so they had this really great visual style, and then they started a record label called Two Tone. And Two Tone is a label that is all about bringing black and white people together. It's about having an anti-racist stand in life and in your art. And they had lots of different bands that I became interested in. And I fell in love with this band and this movement. And now I wasn't 8 years old anymore. I was 14. And so I was going to do something about this passion in my life. So one day I go downstairs and I'm like, Mom, I'm moving to London. And she's like, you are? How are you going to pay for that? And so I was like, I'm going to get a job. And so I was 14. This is the early 80s. And so I started babysitting. I started collecting cans and newspapers, anything I could do to earn some money. And then when I was 15, I got my Social Security card. And I got a job as a file clerk at my mom's company. And I worked for a year doing that. And so I spent 2 years saving money to move to London. And so after 2 years, I had saved up enough to go for 6 months. And this was 1984. There weren't any exchange student programs with London back in 1984. And so I got one of those Fodor's London on $25 a day books. And in the book, there was a company that did homestays. And so I wrote them a snail mail letter. And I asked if they could arrange for a homestay for me for 6 months. And they were able to do that. And they were able to get me enrolled in the Southgate School, which is a school in North London. And I studied there for 6 months. And one of the friends that I met there, his name was Stephen Twigg. And he introduced me to protest marches and politics and being an advocate and having agency. And this was back in the Thatcher and Reagan days. And so there was a lot to talk about. And so that was part of my experience there. And then Stephen actually went on to become the first openly gay member of Parliament in England in 1997, and we're still friends today. In London, walking down the street in Brixton and Camberwell and New Cross, anywhere in South London, that's where the mixed people are. And you see mixed people in politics and on TV and in lots of places. And nobody was calling me Yellow Banana Girl there. And so I fit in. I blended. I felt like I belonged. But I couldn't stay. Because I was just a sophomore in high school and I had to come home and finish high school right here at Stadium. But that feeling of belonging, it stuck with me. And so years later, when I was going to do my PhD, I decided I would do it in London. I wanted to research how museums engaged with Black people as audience members, as staff members, and as subjects and objects sometimes depicted in the art on the walls. And so in 2005, I started my PhD at Goldsmiths. I started reading sociology and culture studies. And I started learning about identity from a theoretical perspective, from Stuart Hall and Paul Gilroy and Les Back and Bev Skaggs. And then I started volunteering with Black Cultural Archives, where I became a trustee. And we engaged in a partnership project with the Victoria and Albert Museum, which is the world's oldest and largest design museum. We created a program called Staying Power, the Staying Power Project. Staying Power is a book by Peter Fryer, and it's all about Black British history through hundreds of years. And so we named the project after that book. And we started collecting photographs that depicted Black British identity. We collected 135 photographs by 17 different artists. 14 of them were Black British artists. And so we were able to expand the canon at the V&A. We quadrupled the number of artists they had in their canon, and we expanded who was accepted as an artist and what was fine art and what did it mean in terms of representation for Black people. So it was a very significant project that we worked on. But for myself, over 10 years, I learned a lot about what it meant to be Black, what it meant to be mixed, what it meant to be American while I was working on this project. But once again, I couldn't stay. Brexit was on the horizon. A lot of the immigration structures were changing, and I couldn't get a visa. And my mom was also having some health issues, and so I needed to come back to Tacoma. And so when I got back here, I was really divided at first. I was really missing London and my friends there, but I was happy to be with my family and my friends here. I wanted to be in academia, but then I also wanted to be in the arts. The world was my oyster, but I didn't know what direction to go in. And so I interviewed all over the place, in Washington, D.C., and Austin, and Davis, and I was always a silver medalist. I always came in second. And then I heard about the job at Hilltop Artists, and I knew that was the perfect job for me. I interviewed for this job, and I'm proud to say I got the gold. Yeah. And one of the interesting things is, like, in the time that it took me to find my dream job, I fell in love with Tacoma all over again. And I rekindled a sense of belonging here in my own hometown. And everybody needs a sense of belonging and a place to be, regardless of their class, their culture, their gender. And at Hilltop Artists, we create that place for a lot of young people. We offer the opportunity to create art, and we allow students to grow as artists and as people, and we give young people a space to develop their identities and their sense of selves. And I recognize this because that's my story too. There wasn't a Hilltop Artist when I was growing up, but I did have art in my life, and I did have mentorship of a sort, even if it was from afar, from some random band in the UK. And while I wasn't actively involved with drugs and gangs as a young person, I did face bullying, and I faced challenges. And those challenges and bullying led me to question my identity, which in turn led me to the arts and expression through the arts, which informed my career path and my research course. And all of that led me here to this seat today, and I'm back home where I belong. And I'm really grateful for that. Thank you.